we have one at the shop. So Copernicus is available, but it's a very expensive book. Same thing, except the Hypnerotomachia, there are fewer copies than the Gutenberg Bible. There are 21 complete. There are quite a few fragmentary copies. So rare is a very slippery term. Okay. Now, as far as the Bible itself, Gutenberg, 1455, it was not actually dated. There is no colophon on the Gutenberg Bible. We don't know exactly when it was written, except that in some of the copies, the rubricator, the person that did the decoration of all the illumination of the capitals and things, little illustrations, he signed it and dated it 1455. That's how we know when it was printed. Now, the Geneva Breeches Bible of the 16th century, it's called the Breeches Bible because in puritanical style, Adam and Eve discovered they were naked, and they took fig leaves and sewed them together to make themselves breeches. So that's how where the breeches part comes from. It's also distinguished in the Christmas story in Luke that instead of manger, it says crotch. Another antiquated word. But the King James Bible of 1611, this was quite a miracle because they took all the scholars together and said, okay, get busy, translate, and they all came out with the translation that we have today. The these, thous, and all of the antiquated speech of King James' time, which King James himself, by the way, was referred to as the wisest fool in Christendom. Not a particular scholar, but he backed the right people at the right time. So Bibles, unfortunately, unless they're printed before 1480, are not really valuable, with the exception of the King James and some other very specific books, because there were more Bibles printed than anything else. Every home in England, virtually, in the 17th century, had a Bible. All right? So, now let's talk, in terms of rarity, let's talk about this. Mark Twain's first book, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. Okay? That was his first printed book. So it's a very desirable thing to have. The first issue was a little over 1,000 copies. Now, by issue and edition, what we mean, when the type is set and an impression is printed, that's the first edition, first issue. If there's mistakes that are discovered in that set of type, they're corrected. They stop printing, they correct the error, and then continue printing. That is the next issue. But in this case, this was done up in something called stereotype. The type was all put together in a form, and a mirror image of that type was taken, and a printing plate was made. So these 1,050 copies, roughly, were printed. And 20 days later, it was so popular, another 550 copies were struck from the same plates. Now the only difference is, there's no little piece, there's one leaf of advertising that was tipped into the first issue. And in running these first 1,000 copies, some of the type on one plate got a little bit damaged. That's the only difference. Okay? Which one is the more scarce book? From pure numbers, it's the second issue. Which one is the most valuable? The first. Because the cult of first edition, first issue. This is something that bibliophiles go very crazy over, hair splitting to get the very first thing that came off the press. Does it really matter? Not to me. As a collector, I want the best edition. And that means the most complete and what was under the control of the author. A lot of times things got mixed up and messed up as different editions went along. For example, the Franklin Experiments and Observations on Electricity. The first edition, Franklin had complete control over. But then the second, third, fourth, by the time the fourth came around, it was very corrupt because other people had changed his words. The fifth edition, Franklin directly had control and put things back as he intended. So that, to me, is the more desirable edition. You need to know the little details of what you're collecting. Okay, so value. Here's some values. I just checked on what a Lewis and Clark with the map. I about fell over. You know, I didn't think that was worth $350K, but that's what they're asking for right now. And there's only one on the market. Tamerlane, well, you gotta wait for somebody to die, and you're never gonna get the ones out of the institutional collections. No, UCLA has one at the Clark Library. It's a very scruffy little pamphlet. I have some facsimiles back in the gallery that you're welcome to take. It's just the cover. It's not. I didn't transcribe the whole thing because honestly, Tamerlane is a rather boring poem. Huckleberry Finn, a really nice first edition, in great shape. What the binding is in nice shape. Yeah, it's going to cost you about $8,500. Newton, yeah, about $300,000. First folio. When the next one comes around, it will break that number. And if another Gutenberg should happen to fall out of the sky somewhere, well, the sky is the limit, because that is the book that everybody would want. So, what about Gutenberg? Was he the inventor of printing?
No.
Very good. What did he do? Exactly.
Movable metal type.
Movable metal type, and even more important, ink. Yeah, that's a big part of it too. Yeah, you gotta have ink. That's, but the adjustable mold for making the type, because I's and L's are on a very narrow piece of type, where W's and M's are on a very wide piece. So everything is proportioned as you would write. Gutenberg was not trying to fool anybody per se, but he modeled his printing after the best manuscript hand of his day. The wonderful thing about this was that it was uniform. There was no, you didn't have a whole bunch of different monks writing these things out in different hands. So it was completely uniform. Now, anybody know how much a Gutenberg Bible cost when it was brand new? No? It was about 20 florins. Make the conversion yourself. Well, to put it in perspective, that was a secretary's wage for 2 years. So, would you spend, let's say, a year to a year and a half of your gross wage on one book? Kind of expensive. But books were very expensive then. Manuscripts, of course, preceded printed. And block books. Block books, it was a piece of wood that the words and images were carved into the block, and it was printed. The only problem was you couldn't change anything. Any mistakes on there, sorry. But Gutenberg used a whole bunch of his skills in the goldsmithing industry and applied it to movable type. So he also used the wine press as a model and came up with the printing press. But alas, poor Johannes, he got caught up in sort of the, well, it wasn't quite the Bernie Madoff scam, but he kind of lost his shirt. He borrowed from Johann Fust, who's borrowed a bunch of money, and unfortunately couldn't pay it back. So Fust and his nephew Peter Schoeffer, took over, and they actually actually took printing further. So, in terms of first editions, all right, the first appearance is as the author intended. And so it's a desirable thing. Now,